This is Dr. Ante Pavlovic. Now he is kind of a hard man to describe. He is a man determined to lead the masses. An undefeated fighter. A passionate womanizer. And on top of that,
Ja sam reinkarnacija Isusa Krista.
he was a man born in former Yugoslavia, who went to the United States, obtained a chiropractic degree, and returned to a war-torn 1990s Croatia to spread his miraculous teachings. He opened Ante's Temple of Health and amassed a substantial following. He became a guru, in my opinion a cult leader, and an absolute menace to society. This is the cult of Dr. Ante. The end of the 80s and the beginning of the 1990s was a turbulent time in Europe. The fall of the Berlin Wall and the lifting of the Iron Curtain between the West and East led to the demise of many communist empires of Eastern Europe. While most of them transitioned into democracies without too many bloodshed, Yugoslavia wasn't that lucky. Its divide and decades-long inner tensions led to the bloody Balkan Wars of the 1990s that left the newly formed countries devastated and their population poor and hopeless. Basically, former Yugoslav countries were fertile ground for crime, corruption, and, well, grifters. Enter Dr. Ante Pavlovic. Somewhere around the late 1980s, early 1990s, Ante came to Croatia after his life abroad. He had a charismatic and powerful persona, something the likes of that era's people never seen before. He was fast on his tongue, aggressive in his teaching methods, and fearless in his public performances. From the moment of his return, he started preaching his miraculous healing powers, comprised in a method he called the centering, which on the surface was a series of chiropractic and alternative medicine practices. His background at the time was also shrouded in secrecy. He was born in 1957 in Prijedor in today's Bosnia and Herzegovina. He studied theology but never became a priest. Then he went off to Switzerland and subsequently to the United States to pursue his chiropractic career. But other than that, not much was known about him. However, his colorful, persuasive persona, combined with the fact that many Croats were desperate during the post-war period, resulted in his first batch of followers. In Donji Dragonožec, near the capital of Zagreb, he opened Ante's Temple of Health, which was his healing headquarters and primary living residence. Part of his rapid growth was the fact that he was in a way ahead of his time. A lot of his healing rituals were taped during the 1990s and spread all over the curious mainstream media. He would also later post the videos on his YouTube channel, and I don't know whether he was a visionary in that way, predicting the power of future online media, which would amass him an even bigger following, but he sure loved to make videos. So, what were his teachings? How exactly did he help his patients? What was that so-called centering all about? After watching hours of his old tapes, skimming through his books, honestly, the best word to describe him and his methods is the word circus. I don't even think he knew what he was doing, but regardless, I will try to uncover it. The first part of his teachings is the non-physical part. It's the way you live your life that has to change. Dr. Ante preached more exercise, no smoking, no drinking, no conventional medicine, and no glasses. That's right, no glasses. Dr. Ante had a strong dislike for glasses. He considered them a fraudulent product that don't benefit your eyesight whatsoever. The only way to truly improve your vision is to let him fix you. In fact, he disliked glasses so much that he didn't let his followers wear them at all, and he took them away from them. He actually amassed quite a collection over the years. The rest of his vocal teachings aren't that straightforward. Every interview of his has a different idea, different agenda, different method. He kind of sounds like a madman who spews anything that comes to his mind. Except that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. That was an often one. And Sai Baba. He really adored Sai Baba. Well, okay, seems mildly crazy at this point. But let's get into the meat of his centering, which was the physical part. The oldest of his videos feature his followers taken to a lake near Novocice during winter, where he would order his followers to strip down to their underwear and swim in the cold river. Doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter how sick a person comes to him, you go into that freezing cold water no matter what. Of course, Dr. Ante, not being a pussy, goes first. Oh, and I almost forgot, before the whole ice lake bath, him and his followers would bless his newly published books. Well, okay, I personally find ice-cold baths pleasurable, and from what I can read, they are very beneficial to your health. So, is that the big fuss about his centering? Well, no. You see, in a lot of his videos and interviews, you could observe that a lot of his centering methods revolve around abuse. A lot of abuse. For instance, this is him taking off his gun holsters and handcuffing his hands so that he couldn't kill his follower who disobeyed his order. Yeah. Besides that, he was also very perverted. Any woman that came to him for help was in for a roller coaster of abuse. Basically, from what I can gather, every individual that came to him for help was subjugated to some form of physical and/or mental abuse that he would package as a cure to their ailments. He would hold long speeches, which were basically lunatic monologues, where he would jump from one point to another, never really making any sense, after which he would proceed to the physical part of the centering, which was individually crafted for each person, based on who they were and how weak they were to his influence. One extremely disturbing episode of his work was the visit of a family and their 12-year-old son to his temple of health, because the boy was, as his father put it, problematic, acting out because of his parents' divorce. Upon arrival, Pavlovic immediately started showering the boy with insults and curses, after which he asked the boy whether he watched porn, to which the boy replied no, and Dr. Ante concluded that isn't normal, asking him does he even have a penis, commanding the boy to take off his pants and show him his genitalia so that he could verify that he did. The frightened boy replied that he won't, to which Pavlovic replied that no one could say no to him. He started pulling the boy towards the middle of the room and tried to forcibly take off his pants. After being unsuccessful in that endeavor, he threw the boy on the floor, whereupon the child started wailing and calling for his dad. The father wanted to react, but the mother stopped him. Pavlovic then started to hit the boy, after which the boy left the room with his father. On top of it all, he taped the entire incident and posted it on his YouTube channel as a series of a couple of videos. The video in question was since removed. He was luckily sentenced to 20 months in prison after this escapade, which he probably would have avoided if not for his video-making passion, publishing it all online. Now, you might be asking yourself, who in the flying fuck would ever seek this dude's help? How did he acquire any patients, followers in the first place? Well, the initial group that started following him were people who didn't know any better. I mean, look, it was the 1990s, a post-war desperate period without the world of social media. People were sick, lost, poor, and thus in need of a charismatic persona in their life. And once Dr. Ante lured his first batch of desperate souls in, he used his incredible brainwashing capabilities to turn them into walking advertisements. Advertisements that were scared shitless of him. He controlled the people who came to him with fear. He was a sadistic leader who preyed on the most vulnerable of people. His ecstatic public displays of aggression towards those who disobeyed his orders really instilled veneration into the eyes of his followers. Fear, sickness, and subsequently desperation led these people to attach themselves like leeches to the charismatic persona that was Dr. Ante Pavlovic. That's why I think even after his crazy TV performances, people continued seeking his help. Because through the word of mouth of his followers who were scared and mesmerized by Dr. Ante, others equally desperate came. Of course, after social media became a thing, Dr. Ante fame grew exponentially. Luckily, not so much in actual patients, but more so in the form of a huge online following of people who, quite frankly, found him extremely funny and entertaining. And that was what he essentially became, an online personality. He became somewhat of a celebrity in the fringe parts of the internet because his perverted and abusive, yet charismatic personality became a small social media sensation to a decent chunk of people. Of course, as his infamy grew, the number of people who actually sought his help decreased. As it always goes with these gurus, people eventually realize what a shallow vessel they are. However, the notoriety of Ante Pavlovic continued to grow because he managed to replace the once rows of help seekers with scandals and vile public performances. The list is too long and honestly a topic for another video, but here are just some of the ecstatic things he's done in the past decade or so. He continued the shtick of him being the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, and as such, he naturally wanted to become the president of Croatia. Most of his YouTube videos were vlogs of his mischievous adventures where he would, among other things, promote himself as the next president of Croatia. He even passed around public posters advertising his candidacy. Luckily, he never got close to even becoming a candidate. However, that was just the tip of the iceberg. He was a constant menace to everyone around him, especially the neighbors in Donji Dragonožec where his temple was situated. They would frequently call the police on him because he strolled around the village naked. His animals, particularly his horses, were free to roam wherever they wanted. He also frequently stopped the traffic in front of his temple, and if he was in a particularly good mood, he would damage the cars with his telescopic bat. Everyone was afraid of him, and only the brave few would occasionally get into altercations with him because no one knew what to expect from him. Well, actually, they did know. He got into frequent fights. Some of them were published by him on his YouTube channel. He assaulted several of his neighbors, and as an icing on the cake, he beat up the village's pastor and church's bell ringer because they disobeyed his orders. Well, they didn't want to acknowledge that he was the reincarnation of Jesus Christ. Yup, Jesus would turn water into wine, and Dr. Ante would beat you to a pulp. Oh, and by the way, he wasn't even a doctor. The internet brought him fame he could have never imagined, but as it goes with internet, it's kind of a double-edged sword. Apparently, from what people gathered, he didn't obtain any serious chiropractic degree. He was essentially a self-proclaimed doctor and a chiropractic. What they did find, however, is that he was a frequent customer of mental institutions in Switzerland and the United States. The last few years of his life were spent not much less scandalous than the previous ones. In fact, a few years before his death, the public became, yet again, appalled by his actions when police raided his temple of health and found a number of dead animal remains and other malnutrition animals roaming around the estate. What prompted the raid was, among everything else, that Dr. Ante was under investigation because he was, as he said, helping a local homeless person get back on his feet, when in reality, he was basically torturing him and holding him in captivity as a slave. The last years of his life, Ante Pavlovic developed diabetes, which resulted in his toes being amputated. He, however, stayed true to his own teachings and refused to take conventional therapy for his diabetes. He died in the summer of 2020, and while majority of people view him as a controversial and rather despicable figure, some of his followers still consider that Ante Pavlovic was a miracle healer, a misunderstood character, and overall, a positive persona.